Eric Cross was 41 years old, and until that Tuesday night in late October, he believed his marriage was simply going through a quiet season. He was a contractor who had built his family's home with his own hands. His wife, Daria, was a hospital administrator, polished, ambitious, and, for 12 years, completely convincing. Then, just after midnight, she slipped out of bed. Eric lay still, breathing evenly, pretending to be asleep. He heard her voice through the cracked bathroom door. Hushed at first, logistical. Account numbers, a March deadline, another man's name. But then her voice changed completely. It dropped into something softer, something unguarded, something Eric hadn't heard her sound like in years. I love you. You know that, right? I love you so much. No hesitation, no guilt, just ownership. Like those words had belonged to someone else for a long time, and Eric was only now finding out. He walked back to bed. He lay down beside her in the dark, and he didn't say a single word. What came next would cost Daria everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The bedroom was quiet except for the soft whir of the ceiling fan, the one Eric had installed himself 3 summers ago. He lay on his back, feeling the familiar weight of his body sink into the mattress after a long day at the construction site. His calloused hands, still bearing traces of sawdust despite his evening shower, rested on top of the covers. The master bedroom was his proudest renovation in the house. He'd gutted it down to the studs, replaced every inch of drywall, installed the elegant crown molding that Daria had picked from a catalog. The memory of her excitement back then still lived in these walls, her face lighting up as each detail came together, before that light started dimming in ways he couldn't quite name. Now, the room felt different. The king-sized bed might as well have been 2 separate islands. Daria kept to her side, he to his, with an invisible line drawn down the middle that grew wider with each passing month. Their bathroom told the same story. Her toiletries arranged precisely on the left sink, his basic necessities clustered on the right. Even their towels hung on opposite ends of the rack he'd mounted. Eric shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the sheets. At 41, his body carried the honest aches of a man who'd built his contracting business from nothing but a pickup truck and determination. Every house he'd ever worked on, every beam he'd ever placed, every tile he'd ever set, they all lived in his muscles' memory. He'd learned early from his father and grandfather that good work meant doing things right the first time, measuring twice before cutting once. The digital clock on his nightstand read 11:42 p.m. Daria had come to bed late again, citing another hospital board meeting that ran long. These meetings seemed to multiply lately, along with conferences and administrative functions that kept her away more and more. He'd chosen to believe her because that's what trust meant. His father had taught him that too. Trust until you can't. Then trust your instincts. The house creaked softly, settling into the October night. Through the window, maple leaves cast shifting shadows on the wall, trees he'd planted himself when they first bought the property. He could almost drift off, almost let sleep take him under. Then he felt it. The slight shift in the mattress as Daria carefully extracted herself from the covers. In the darkness, he kept his breathing steady and deep, maintaining the rhythm of sleep. Her footsteps were deliberately light as she moved across the hardwood floors he'd installed board by board. She was trying not to wake him. Something in those footsteps made his eyes open in the darkness. The carefulness in them was different from her usual midnight water runs or bathroom visits. These steps had intention behind them, each one placed with conscious thought. She was moving down the hallway now, past the framed photos of their wedding day, past the spare bedroom he'd converted into her home office. The footsteps stopped, A door closed softly. The guest bathroom, if he was tracking the sound right. And then, carried on the still air of the house, came the murmur of her voice. Low, intimate. The kind of voice used when you don't want to be heard by sleeping ears. Eric lay perfectly still, his body relaxed, but his mind suddenly, completely alert. He couldn't make out words yet, but he could hear the careful modulation in her tone, the way it dipped and rose in the rhythms of conversation. She was talking to someone. At nearly midnight, in their guest bathroom, he kept his breathing steady and deep, maintaining the pretense of sleep, even though he was alone in the room. Years of working construction sites had taught him patience. Sometimes you had to wait for the concrete to set just right, had to let the wood acclimate before you could work with it. So he waited, listening to that muffled voice carrying through the walls of the house he'd built with his own hands. The words weren't clear yet, but they would be. All he had to do was wait. Eric slipped from beneath the covers with the practiced silence of a man who'd spent decades working around sleeping households during early morning jobs. His feet found the hardwood without a sound. The hallway stretched before him, illuminated only by the faint glow of the nightlight they kept in the guest bathroom. Another small detail he'd installed himself, thinking of Daria's late-night water runs. He moved like a shadow, each step placed with deliberate care. The house knew him. He'd built too much of it not to know exactly which boards might creak under pressure. 15 feet down the hall, 10, 5. The guest bathroom door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of light spilling onto the carpet he'd laid 2 years ago. Daria's voice became clearer as he drew closer, though she was still speaking in hushed tones. He positioned himself against the wall beside the doorframe, where the shadows were deepest. His breathing remained steady and controlled, just as it did when he had to hold a beam perfectly level while his crew secured it in place. "He doesn't know anything, Brad. He never does." Her voice carried through the gap, casual and dismissive, as though discussing a child who couldn't grasp simple concepts. Eric's hands flexed once at his sides, then relaxed. He'd handled materials too dangerous to grip with tension. This moment required the same discipline. The accounts? Yes. Everything we talked about. A pause as she listened to the voice on the other end. "I've been moving it exactly like we planned. Small amounts. He never checks anyway." The wall felt solid against Eric's back, grounding him as the implications of her words sank in. He'd trusted her with their finances because that's what partners did. Played to each other's strengths, covered each other's gaps. "By March," she continued, her voice taking on an edge of determination. "I need it done by March. That gives us plenty of time to—" Her voice dropped even lower, and Eric had to strain to catch the rest. "Get everything in place. The timing has to be perfect." There was another pause, longer this time. The silence felt heavy, loaded with things yet unsaid. Then Daria's voice changed, dropped an entire register into something soft and intimate, a tone he hadn't heard from her in so long he'd almost forgotten she was capable of it. "I know what I'm doing. I've been planning this longer than you have." A quiet laugh, private and warm. "You worry too much." More silence. Then, barely above a whisper, but clear as breaking glass in the quiet house. "I love you. You know that, right? I love you so much." The words hung in the air like smoke. There was no hesitation in them, no trace of guilt or conflict. They flowed from her with the ease of repetition, of a truth long established. These were words that had found a new home, been given away to someone else while Eric slept in their bed, worked at his sites, built their life piece by piece. His chest felt hollow, as though someone had reached in and scooped everything out with careful precision. The physical sensation of betrayal was immediate and profound. Not just the affair, but the calculation behind it, the planning, the patience of it. He moved back down the hallway before she could finish, each step measured and silent. His mind went to Marcus Thompson, the business partner who'd tried to steal his contracts when he was 29, thinking Eric too young and too trusting to notice the paperwork being redirected, the clients being approached privately. Eric had dismantled that betrayal piece by piece, documentation by documentation, without ever raising his voice. Marcus hadn't worked in residential construction in their county since. Back in bed, Eric lay still and studied the ceiling he'd plastered himself. Every swirl in the texture was familiar. He'd created each one. The urge to confront her immediately was a physical pressure in his chest, like holding his breath underwater. But confrontation would give her time to hide whatever she'd been moving, time to craft explanations, time to take even more than she already had. The door to the guest bathroom clicked shut. Daria's footsteps whispered down the hallway. The bed dipped as she slid back under the covers, and soon her breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep. Dawn began its slow creep across the ceiling, first gray, then pale gold, painting the room in colors that felt entirely different from any previous morning in this house. Eric hadn't slept, but he had made a decision. The kitchen filled with the familiar scent of coffee as Eric measured the grounds with practiced care. 2 level scoops per 6 cups, the way he'd done it every morning for 12 years. Sunlight crept through the windows he'd installed himself, casting long shadows across the granite countertops Daria had chosen from the supplier's showroom. He cracked eggs into a bowl, whisking them with mechanical precision, while fragments of last night's conversation echoed in his mind. Each word felt carved into his memory. He doesn't know anything. The eggs sizzled as they hit the pan. By March. The spatula moved steadily, folding the edges. I love you so much. His movements remained smooth, unhurried, as though this morning was like any other. The coffee maker gurgled its final notes just as Daria's footsteps sounded on the stairs. Eric watched her entrance through new eyes, the way she paused in the doorway, how her smile bloomed with practiced warmth, the casual grace with which she moved through their kitchen. He wondered how long she'd been rehearsing this performance, perfecting each gesture until it looked natural. Something smells wonderful, she said, sliding onto one of the bar stools they'd picked out together at that antique market in Providence. Her voice carried the same easy affection it always had, but now Eric heard the hollow space behind it. Just eggs, he replied, sliding a plate in front of her. Coffee? Please. She reached for her phone, scrolling through emails with one hand while accepting the mug with the other. The morning light caught her wedding ring, the one he'd saved 3 months of earnings to buy when they were younger and fuller of honest promises. Eric settled across from her with his own plate. Sleep okay? Thought I heard you up in the night. Daria's pause was almost imperceptible. Almost. Couldn't sleep, she said, not looking up from her phone. Had some emails to catch up on. You know how the board gets when things pile up. He nodded, taking a slow sip of coffee. They work you too hard. Someone has to keep that place running, she smiled, the same smile she'd given him thousands of mornings before. But now he saw the performance in it, the careful construction of a wife going through her morning routine, playing her part in a scene she'd already decided would end. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, comfortable for her, heavy with unspoken knowledge for him. When she stood to leave, she pressed a kiss to his cheek. The gesture felt like a signature on a contract he hadn't known he was signing. Don't forget we have dinner with the Hendersons on Friday, she said, gathering her things. Wouldn't dream of it, he replied, and watched her walk out to her car, the same car he'd helped her choose 3 years ago. Right around the time he now realized that Broad had entered the picture. The house felt different once she was gone. Eric sat at the kitchen table, watching his coffee grow cold in the mug Daria had given him last Christmas. The morning light caught dust motes floating through the air. Tiny things, invisible until illuminated just right. He pulled out his phone and called Porter James. They'd been friends since before Eric had his first truck, before he'd built his business from nothing but calloused hands and determination. Porter had been the one to warn him about Marcus Thompson's scheme all those years ago. "I need you to look into some things," Eric said when Porter answered. "Start today." Porter's response was immediate. No questions asked. "Send me what you have. I'll clear my schedule." The next call was to Aunt Gloria. She picked up on the second ring, just like she had when he was 16 and needed a ride home from football practice, when he was 22 and wanted advice about starting his own business, when he was 29 and struggling with whether to trust his instincts about Marcus. "Talk to me," she said. And Eric did. He laid out everything: the phone call, the March deadline, the casual dismissal in Daria's voice when she'd said he never noticed anything. Gloria listened without interrupting, her silence carrying the weight of years spent teaching him about numbers, about trust, about self-respect. When he finished, her voice was steady. "Come to me when you're ready. I'll have the coffee on." That afternoon, Eric stood at his newest job site, a complete home renovation for a retired judge who wanted everything done right, no corners cut. He watched his crew setting up, called out measurements, checked the level on each beam before it was secured. "Remember," he told his newest worker, demonstrating the proper technique, "measure twice, cut once, always." The corner booth at Mel's Diner felt like neutral ground. Worn red vinyl, coffee rings staining the laminate tabletop, afternoon sunlight filtering through blinds that had seen better decades. Eric watched Porter slide into the seat across from him, a manila folder tucked under one arm. They'd picked this place because it was 15 miles from their neighborhood, far enough that nobody who knew Daria would happen by. "Coffee?" The waitress appeared with a pot before either of them could answer. "Please," Porter said, waiting until she'd filled both cups and moved away before placing the folder on the table. His movements were careful, deliberate, the way a doctor might arrange papers before delivering difficult news. "Tell me," Eric said simply. Porter opened the folder and began laying out documents with methodical precision. 3 years, he said, his voice low and steady. "That's how long it's been going on with Broderick Hale. He's a real estate developer, operates mainly in commercial properties downtown, but has some residential holdings too." Eric nodded, studying the first photograph Porter placed before him. Daria and a tall man in an expensive suit, entering the Madison Hotel. The timestamp showed a Tuesday afternoon 3 months ago, a day Daria had told him she had a hospital board retreat. "I have phone records," Porter continued, sliding over several pages of highlighted calls and texts. "Hotel receipts, restaurant charges. They're not particularly careful anymore. Probably figured you weren't paying attention." He paused, watching Eric's face. "But that's not the worst of it." Eric looked up from the photographs, his expression carefully neutral. "Go on." Porter pulled out a stack of bank statements, each page marked with yellow sticky notes. "You said Daria handles the household finances, right? Manages the joint accounts?" At Eric's nod, he continued. "She's been making transfers, small ones, spread out so they don't raise flags. 200 here, 500 there. Always under 1,000 at a time." Eric's hands were steady as he took the statements, but Porter saw the muscle in his jaw tighten as he studied the numbers. "Over 14 months, Porter said quietly. "She's moved nearly $47,000 to a private account in her name only. The transfers usually coincide with weekends she claimed to be at conferences or girls' trips." The diner's ambient noise seemed to fade away as Eric processed this information. The clinking of plates, the murmur of other conversations, the hiss of the coffee maker, all of it receded behind the weight of what he was seeing. "She's not just having an affair," Eric said finally, his voice level. "She's building an escape route. And funding it with your money," Porter confirmed. "The pattern suggests planning. This isn't heat-of-the-moment stuff, Eric. This is calculated." Eric closed the folder slowly, his hands flat against the manila surface. The wedding ring on his left hand caught the afternoon light. The same hand that had built their home, signed their mortgage, trusted her with their shared accounts. "What else might be out there?" he asked after a long moment. Porter leaned back, studying his old friend's face. "Hale's name is on some property paperwork that has Daria's signature, too. I need to dig deeper there. Something about a duplex purchase that doesn't quite add up. Could be nothing, could be significant." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of the kitchen's bell announcing orders ready. Eric thought about the house he'd built, every nail and beam placed with care. About the business he'd grown from a single truck into a respected name in residential contracting. About Daria's voice in the dark of their home. "I know what I'm doing. I've been planning this longer than you have." "Find it," Eric said simply, his voice carrying the same quiet authority he used on job sites when giving instructions that needed to be followed exactly. He stood, leaving enough cash on the table to cover both coffees and a generous tip. The drive to Aunt Gloria's house took 27 minutes. He counted each one, letting the rhythm of the road organize his thoughts. When he pulled into her driveway, he sat for a moment with the engine running, then picked up his phone. The call connected on the first ring. "I'm outside," he said. "Put the coffee on." The screen door creaked softly as Eric entered Aunt Gloria's kitchen. The familiar scent of her coffee, stronger than anyone else dared to brew it, filled the warm air. Gloria stood at the counter, already pouring 2 mugs, her silver hair caught in the afternoon light streaming through the window above her sink. "Sit," she said simply, turning to face him. Her eyes, sharp behind reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck, took in his expression. She didn't ask if he was okay. She knew better. Eric spread Porter's documents across her kitchen table, the same table where she'd taught him to balance a checkbook before he could drive, where she'd helped him draft his first business plan 15 years ago. Gloria settled into her chair, pulled her legal pad close, and picked up the mechanical pencil she'd been using for as long as Eric could remember. "Show me everything," she said, voice steady and practical. This was how Gloria handled crisis, with precision and purpose. Eric walked her through Porter's findings while she made careful notes, her handwriting as neat and measured as it had been when she kept books for the city's largest accounting firm. When he finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Your phone," she said, holding out her hand. "Pull up your household calendar." Eric unlocked his phone and opened the calendar app, sliding it across the table. Gloria began cross-referencing dates, her pencil moving swiftly as she matched Daria's transfers against each claimed absence. "March 15th, she read. "Hospital Administrators Conference in Charlotte. Transfer of $800 that same morning." She made a mark on her pad. "April 22nd. Girls' weekend in Asheville with her college friends. Another $600 that Friday." More marks. "May 7th. Board retreat. $750. The pencil moved faster. "June 18th. July 9th. August 27th. The pattern emerged with devastating clarity, each withdrawal precisely timed to coincide with Daria's fabricated commitments. Gloria's fury showed only in the tightening of her fingers around the pencil and the careful way she set down each page. $46,850, Gloria said finally, the total underlined twice on her pad. "That's not impulse, Eric. That's strategy." She turned to a fresh page and began writing rapidly, creating categories. Accounts to freeze, documents to copy, assets to protect. Her decades of financial experience transformed into a battle plan. "First," she said, "you need to place an immediate hold on any remaining joint accounts. Legal, quiet, today. Your business accounts are still separate, thank God. Remember when I insisted on that, and she pitched such a fit?" Gloria's pencil never stopped moving. "Second, we document every transfer, every receipt, every lie about where she was and what the money was for. Third, We protect your contracts and current projects. She has no legal claim to your business assets, but we make damn sure that's crystal clear." Eric watched his aunt's hands move across the paper, creating order from chaos the way she always had. The list grew longer, each item precise and actionable. Then Gloria set down her pencil and looked at him directly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen this coming in ways he hadn't let himself acknowledge. "Baby," she said softly, "she's not just leaving you. She's trying to make sure you can't come back from it. This isn't about love or even about that man she's running around with. This is about making sure you stay down once she's gone." The truth of it settled into Eric's chest, like concrete setting. He thought about the house he'd built, the business he'd grown, the life he'd constructed beam by careful beam. Daria wasn't just walking away. She was trying to dismantle his foundation. Gloria pressed the list into his hands, folded precisely and crisp with purpose. "Put that in your pocket," she said. "Then call Vivian Okafor. Margaret's firm used her last year when they caught their CFO cooking the books. She knows exactly what to do with people who think they're smarter than everyone else's math." Eric stood, tucking the list into his breast pocket. He bent to kiss Gloria's cheek, a gesture that carried decades of gratitude. Back in his truck, he pulled out his phone and dialed the number Gloria had written at the bottom of her list. The line rang twice. "Vivian Okafor's office," a crisp voice answered. "My name is Eric Cross," he said. "I need to schedule a meeting with Attorney Okafor. It's regarding marital asset fraud." The law office occupied the third floor of a renovated brick building downtown. Eric took the stairs, Porter's folder and Gloria's analysis tucked under his arm. The hallway was quiet, morning sun streaming through tall windows onto polished hardwood floors. He found Suite 304 and pushed through a heavy oak door into a reception area where crisp white walls met dark wood trim. A young woman at the desk looked up expectantly. "Eric Cross for Attorney Okafor." "Yes, Mr. Cross. Please, follow me." She led him down a short hallway to a corner office where Vivian Okafor stood behind her desk, reviewing a document. She was younger than Eric expected, maybe late 30s, wearing a tailored navy suit, her braids gathered into an elegant updo. She looked up as Eric entered, her gaze direct and assessing. Before sitting in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, Eric placed both folders in front of her. "The red one is from my PI," he said. "The blue one is my aunt's financial analysis. She's a retired CPA." Vivian nodded once and opened Porter's folder first. She began reviewing documents with methodical precision, making occasional notes on a legal pad. Her expression remained neutral as she worked through the evidence of the affair, the financial transfers, the timeline Gloria had constructed. She asked clarifying questions in a measured tone that suggested she'd seen cases like this before and knew exactly what details mattered. "The transfers are clearly documented," she said finally, looking up from the papers. "Small amounts, consistent intervals, always just under $1,000, designed to avoid attention. But she made a mistake using your joint account as the source. That makes this marital asset fraud, Mr. Cross, not just infidelity." She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded on her desk. "That gives us significantly more leverage than a standard divorce filing. The court takes a very dim view of systematic financial deception between spouses." Eric nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "First, maintain absolute normalcy at home. Continue your regular routine. Give her no indication that anything has changed." Vivian opened her desk drawer and removed a business card. "Second, call this number today. It's my contact at First Citizens Bank. Tell him you're my client and need an immediate freeze on your joint account. It's completely within your legal rights, and he'll handle it discreetly." She wrote something on the back of the card. "Third, have your PI keep digging into the real estate angle. Property purchases create paper trails. If she's involved in anything with this Broderick Hale, we need to know exactly what and when." Eric tucked the card into his wallet. Timeline? I'll prepare a comprehensive filing that addresses both the divorce and the documented fraud. People who think they're winning get sloppy, Mr. Cross. Let her get a little more comfortable. When we move, it won't be a warning shot. It will be a closed door. She stood, extending her hand across the desk. Her grip was firm, professional. I'll be ready when you are. My office will call you by the end of the week with initial paperwork to review. Back in the parking lot, Eric sat in his truck and pulled out his phone. He called the number on Vivienne's card, identified himself as her client, and authorized the account freeze. The bank manager handled it efficiently, asking no unnecessary questions. Within minutes, Eric received a confirmation text that the hold was in place. He drove to his current job site, a kitchen renovation in Myers Park, and worked alongside his crew all day. He installed cabinet hardware, checked the countertop installation, and met with the homeowner about backsplash options. He kept his phone in his pocket, resisting the urge to check if Daria had discovered the account freeze yet. At 5:30, he headed home. He stopped at the grocery store, bought ingredients for the pasta dish Daria had always liked, and prepared dinner with methodical care. When she came through the door at 7, briefcase in hand and heels clicking on the hardwood he'd installed himself, he was setting the table. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice carefully normal as he filled her wine glass. She smiled, settling into her chair. "Endless meetings. The new oncology wing budget review is driving everyone crazy." She took a sip of wine. "This looks wonderful." Eric served the pasta, watching her talk about her day. He saw now what he hadn't before: the practiced ease of her performance, the careful way she managed his perception. He smiled at appropriate moments, asked follow-up questions about the budget review, and felt the weight of Vivienne's business card in his wallet, like a key waiting to turn in a lock. Eric was checking the framing on a new edition when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Porter's name lit up the screen. He stepped away from the noise of circular saws and nail guns, finding a quiet spot near his truck. "Got a minute?" Porter asked, his voice carrying that particular weight Eric had come to recognize. "Same place as before. I need to show you something." The diner looked exactly as it had 10 days ago. Worn vinyl booths, coffee-stained menus, afternoon sun streaming through dusty windows. Porter sat in the same booth, but this time the folder in front of him was noticeably thicker. Eric slid into the seat across from him. The waitress approached with a coffee pot, but Porter waved her off with a polite smile. He waited until she was out of earshot before opening the folder. "3 things," Porter said, his voice low and steady. "First one's the property records." He slid a document across the table. 7 months ago, Daria co-signed on a duplex purchase with Broderick Hale. Nice area, just outside Matthews. Purchase price was $485,000. Eric studied the deed. There were their names side by side: Broderick Hale and Daria Cross. His wife's signature, familiar yet strange in this context, dated 7 months prior. Her down payment contribution, Porter continued, sliding another document forward, came from those transfers we tracked. $42,500. She's already a property owner with him, Eric. She didn't just start planning to leave. In the ways that matter most, she's already gone. Eric nodded slowly, his carpenter's hands flat on the table. He had built things his whole life: houses, businesses, trust. He understood better than most how long before a structure falls, the foundation begins to crack. "Second thing?" he asked. Porter's expression tightened slightly. "I dug into Hale's background, found a pattern." He produced several more documents: court filings, settlement agreements, property records. 3 years ago, he was in a relationship with a woman named Christine Larson. It ended badly, very badly. Eric scanned the documents as Porter talked. The story emerged in cold, legal language: shared property purchases, transferred assets, mounting debt in Christine's name. When it ended, she was financially gutted and legally entangled. Broderick had walked away clean through careful maneuvering and quiet settlements. "He's done this before," Porter said quietly. "It's not a relationship gone wrong. It's a pattern. He finds women who are financially ambitious, emotionally dissatisfied, positions himself as both romantic rescue and business partner, structures deals like this duplex purchase to maximize his protection and minimize his exposure. Then, when it serves him, he exits. Cleanly." Eric sat back, letting the full weight of it settle. Daria, who believed she was orchestrating her escape with a willing accomplice, had actually handed a predator a complete map of her vulnerabilities. She had made herself the perfect target while thinking she was the one in control. "She has no idea," Eric said finally. "No," Porter agreed. "She thinks she's using him." Eric felt something complex shift in his chest. Not sympathy, exactly. Daria had made her choices with clear eyes and cold calculation. But this information changed the shape of what was coming. It would be useful. "Thank you," he said, gathering the documents carefully. That evening, after his crew had gone home and the job site was quiet, Eric sat in his truck and made one more call. The phone rang twice before Margaret Whitfield's warm voice answered. "Eric! What a lovely surprise!" "Hey, Margaret," he said, matching her warmth naturally because it was genuine. He had always loved Daria's mother, her quiet dignity, her clear sense of right and wrong. "I was hoping maybe you'd like to come over for Sunday dinner next week. Daria mentioned you've been wanting to get together." "Oh, that would be wonderful," Margaret said. "I'll bring my sweet potato pie. I know it's your favorite." "You spoil me," Eric smiled. "We'd love to have you. I'll be there. Love you, son." "Love you too, Margaret. I mean that." He ended the call and sat for a long moment in the growing dusk, staring at the kitchen table he had refinished himself years ago, stripping away layers of old varnish, sanding down to clean wood, building it back up stronger than before. He was ready. The hardest part of building anything, Eric had learned over decades of construction, was making it look effortless. The same proved true of these final 2 weeks. Each day a careful performance of normalcy that required more skill than any house he'd ever built. He woke before dawn that first morning, the same way he always did. Made coffee, packed his lunch, checked the weather forecast for his outdoor cruise. When Daria came downstairs, he handed her the travel mug he'd prepared exactly how she liked it. 1 sugar, splash of cream. Their fingers brushed. He smiled. She smiled back, the expression perfect but hollow, like a demo house staged for showing. All surface, no life inside. On Thursday, he stopped at Wilson's flower shop on his way home. Sarah Wilson, who'd done their wedding flowers 12 years ago, wrapped a dozen roses with her usual care. "Just because?" she asked with a warm smile. Eric nodded, letting her believe in simple romantic gestures. The truth was, he needed to see exactly how Daria would handle an unexpected display of affection now that he understood the game she was playing. She was at the kitchen island when he arrived home, laptop open, reading glasses perched on her nose. The surprise flickered across her face before she could catch it. "What's this for?" "No reason," he said easily, setting the flowers in front of her. "Just saw them and thought of you." Her smile was perfect, practiced, controlled, but her eyes gave her away. They always had, if you knew how to look. There was something almost impatient in them now, like someone enduring a conversation they can't wait to end. She had already left this marriage in her mind. The roses were just one more thing to pretend about until March. He cooked that night. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, the kind of simple, careful meal he'd made hundreds of times in this kitchen. He asked about her day. She told him about hospital politics, board meetings, the usual carefully curated version of her professional life. He listened with genuine interest, noting how she avoided any mention of Broderick, despite the fact that, as a major developer, He had multiple dealings with the hospital board. The following Tuesday, Eric met James Hartford for lunch. James sat on the hospital board and had known both Eric and Daria for years. The kind of casual friendship built through charity events and holiday parties. They met at a quiet bistro downtown, the type of place where business lunches stretched past 2 o'clock. Halfway through their sandwiches, during a natural lull in conversation about James's new boat, Eric let his smile fade just slightly. "Been a challenging few months at home," he said quietly. "Daria and I are working through some things." He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. James offered the expected sympathetic noises, the requisite encouragement that all marriages had rough patches. Eric nodded, changed the subject smoothly back to safer waters. But he had done what he needed to do, planted just enough context that when the truth emerged, it wouldn't explode like a bomb in Daria's professional circle. The blast radius would be contained. That same afternoon, Vivian's office confirmed what he already knew. Everything was ready. The filing was complete, the documentation preserved, the business accounts fully separated. 3 nights ago, Daria had made another call from the guest bathroom, loud enough to be picked up by Eric's phone recording app, perfectly legal in their state. The recording now sat in Vivian's possession, another piece of leverage she would know exactly how to use. Saturday morning arrived clear and cool. Daria kissed his cheek, casual as anything, and said she was meeting Caroline for brunch. Eric watched through the kitchen window as she backed out of the driveway, knowing Caroline was actually in Charlotte this weekend, a fact Daria had forgotten he knew. He waited until her car disappeared around the corner before pulling out his phone. He typed 2 words to Porter, "Set up the meeting." Then he sat down at the kitchen table, the one he'd refinished himself years ago, stripping away layers of old varnish to get down to the truth of the wood beneath. He didn't move. He barely breathed. He was completely still. The aroma of pot roast filled the house when Daria came downstairs that Sunday afternoon, still fastening an earring. She stopped abruptly in the dining room doorway. Her mother, Margaret, sat at the table, already settled in like she'd been there for hours. A crystal serving dish of her signature sweet potato pie, placed precisely on the dark wood Eric had restored by hand. "Mom!" Daria's voice lifted in genuine surprise. "I didn't know you were coming today." Margaret smiled warmly. "Eric said you suggested getting together." She smoothed her napkin across her lap. "Though apparently he told you I was the one who asked." Something flickered across Daria's face, the micro-expression of someone calculating exits and finding none. She couldn't leave now without explaining why, couldn't manufacture an emergency without raising question. She was trapped by the very social graces her mother had spent decades teaching her. "Of course," Daria recovered smoothly, taking her usual seat. "I must have forgotten mentioning it. Work has been so busy lately." Eric emerged from the kitchen carrying the pot roast, his movements unhurried and precise, the same way he approached everything, measuring twice, cutting once. He set the dish on the table with careful hands, the same hands that had built this home beam by beam. "Margaret, would you like to say grace?" he asked quietly. As Margaret bowed her head to pray, Daria's phone buzzed once in her purse. Then again, more insistent. Her hand twitched toward it, but social training won out. Her mother would never tolerate checking messages during grace. The phone fell silent. Eric served the meal with deliberate grace. Pot roast, roasted potatoes, fresh green beans with almonds. His mother-in-law praised each dish. Daria sat very still, her fork untouched, staring at her plate like she could see something written there that no one else could read. The third buzz of her phone finally broke her. She reached for her purse, glancing at the screen. All color drained from her face. Her hand began to shake ever so slightly as she read what Eric knew was Vivian's comprehensive divorce filing, complete with documented evidence of fraud, financial transfers, and 3 years of systematic deception. Eric let the silence stretch. Let her feel the weight of it. let her understand that everything she thought was hidden had been exposed to light. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "I wanted your mother here," he said, placing a manila folder on the table, "because you've always cared more about what she thinks of you than what God thinks of you. So I wanted her to hear this from me, before you had the chance to craft the story." He laid it out piece by piece: the late-night phone call he'd overheard, the affair with Broderick Hale spanning 3 years, the systematic draining of their joint accounts totaling $47,000, the secret duplex purchase. His voice never rose, never wavered, just stated facts with the same careful precision he used to measure load-bearing walls. "Eric," Daria started, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used in board meeting, "you're not understanding." He reached into the folder and withdrew his phone, pressed play. Her own voice filled the room, recorded 3 nights ago in their guest bathroom. "He won't see it coming, and won't know what to do when it does. That's what makes this perfect, Brod. He's never questioned anything I've ever told him." Across town, Porter was delivering a similar package to Broderick Hale's office: complete documentation of the fraud, a letter from Vivian outlining criminal exposure, and a detailed profile of the previous woman he'd left financially gutted. Broderick's phone began ringing Daria's number immediately. She didn't move to answer it. Margaret sat with tears running silently down her face, but her voice was steel when she looked at her daughter. "You will not speak," she said. "You will listen." Daria's phone buzzed again. Broderick, desperate now, realizing his carefully managed plan was imploding. The sound seemed to echo in the terrible silence. She didn't reach for it. She couldn't move at all. Margaret rose without another word and walked out of the house, leaving her pie untouched on the table Eric had refinished years ago. Daria sat alone, surrounded by the evidence of everything she'd tried to destroy. From the living room came Eric's voice, calm and steady, making calls. Broderick's number lit up her screen one final time. Daria stared at it, motionless, as it blinked out to darkness. 2 years ago, Daria showed up at the house unannounced on a Wednesday evening. Eric had been in his workshop, sanding down a piece of walnut for a custom dining table commission. He heard her car in the driveway, those familiar footsteps on the porch. He set down his tools and waited, knowing this moment would come. She knocked instead of using her key, a small thing that said everything. When he opened the door, she looked different somehow, smaller, less certain of her space in the world. Her designer blazer hung a touch loose, like she'd lost weight. The confident smile she'd worn for 12 years wavered at the edges. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just us. No attorneys." Eric stepped aside to let her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where everything had fallen apart 3 days earlier. Daria placed her handbag carefully beside her chair, smoothed her skirt, and began speaking in the measured tones she used for difficult conversations with the hospital board. "I know I hurt you," she started. "What I did was complicated, but 12 years together has to mean something. We could handle this quietly, between us. Find an arrangement that works for both of us, without all this legal," she gestured vaguely, "escalation." Eric listened without interrupting. He watched her lay out her proposal: a clean split of assets, a quick divorce, no mention of the fraud or financial impropriety. She even managed to make it sound reasonable, almost generous. The performance was flawless, but that's what it was: a performance. When she finished, Eric stayed quiet for a long moment. Not from anger or confusion. He was choosing his words with the same care he used selecting lumber, checking for true grain, testing for strength. "You know what's interesting?" he finally said, his voice calm and clear. "You're still doing it, still assuming I'm too simple to see what this is, too ordinary to understand that you're trying to manage me, even now." He leaned forward slightly, hands folded on the table between them. The affair wasn't the cruelest thing you did. The money wasn't either. What was cruel was deciding, somewhere along the way, that I was too limited to ever catch up to you, too small to ever be a real threat to your plans. Daria's careful composure cracked just slightly. Eric continued, each word measured and true. You thought you were smarter than me because I work with my hands, because I take time to think before I speak, because I believe in building things that last. He shook his head once. That assumption was your only real mistake. Everything else, the affair, the fraud, even Broderick, those were choices. But underestimating me? That was just poor judgment. He stood, extending his hand across the table. Businesslike, final. Vivian will handle everything from here. Take care of yourself, Daria. He walked out of the kitchen without looking back. Daria sat alone at the table, surrounded by the evidence of everything Eric had built while she was busy underestimating him. 2 years passed like water under a bridge. The divorce settlement, shaped by the documented fraud, left Daria with far less than she'd planned. The duplex became a legal nightmare. Broderick's attorneys limited his exposure, leaving her holding obligations she struggled to meet. Broderick himself disappeared from her life within weeks of the legal exposure, his charming facade cracking under pressure. She moved into a small apartment across town. Her position at the hospital survived. Barely. But the board relationships that had once elevated her cooled considerably. The quiet whispers followed her through corridors. She learned to take different routes to her office, avoiding certain faces. Broderick faced his own reckoning. A civil complaint emerged from the documentation Porter had uncovered, which Vivian had quietly forwarded to appropriate channels. His carefully maintained reputation developed cracks he couldn't smooth over. Meanwhile, Eric built. He expanded his contracting business methodically, adding 2 new crews, developing a commercial division that Aunt Gloria helped him structure with her characteristic precision. He designed his own home from the ground up, working evenings and weekends between jobs. The result was modest in size, but extraordinary in craft. Every detail considered, every joint perfect, every finish selected with care. It was exactly what he wanted. No more and no less. Now he stood on the back porch of that home, coffee warming his hands in the early morning air. He watched sunlight creep across the yard he'd landscaped himself, catching on the dew. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A major new project bid he'd been waiting on. He set his coffee down on the railing he'd shaped from reclaimed cedar. He smiled. He had work to do. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.